Good evening, everyone. Now we would like to start the Axis Forum, Return to the Origin. I'm Sano from Axis. Nice to meet you all. And Axis has been carrying out talk events since last August. And today will be the fourth session under the theme of Return to Origin. With the COVID-19, the society has changed. And so we have to return to the origin, and we have to think about what the core of us is. What is the most important thing for us? Now, this is something that we have to think. And based on this idea, we have these series continued. Now, today, our guest speaker is Studio Mumbai's architect of office firm, Mr. Bijoy Jain. Nice to have you today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And today, in Tokyo, in Omotesando, Bijoy has done the installation, and we have the project, the MINO SOIL from Tajimi, and the exhibition has been held here from today. And I am in the exhibition venue, and you can see the installation here behind me. Jane, unfortunately, can't come here today, but to complete this installation, he remotely gave us instructions, and that's what we have heard. Regarding MINO SOIL, in the latter part of the session, the director, Mr. David Glaettli, is going to join us from Switzerland, and we would like to hear from him about that. Well, first of all, Mr. Jain will introduce us the activity in Studio Mumbai. And as you all know, Studio Mumbai is known from its style of doing everything from land creation, designing, and installation by the hands of craftsmen. And they have this unique procedures. And 2 years before in Onomichi, they created the log, which is the accommodations facility, and that was their first foreign project from the Studio Mumbai. And so today we have the facilitators, Ms. Tamaki Harada, the editor of Kawaii Factory. Now I would like to hand it over to you. And then Mr. J, would you please introduce your atelier?
Sure. So do I start? Is that, would you like me to? So just very quickly, I'm just going to give you a sort of brief background. Firstly, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. It's a great joy for me to be participating in this project, in this lecture series, and to still be connected to Japan. For me, it's a second home away from home. And, you know, the moment we're able to travel, I'm going to take the first flight to be back in Japan. So thank you for this time. Thank you for opening your hearts and opening your beautiful country. I'm going to share the first part is a small video. It's a 10-minute video of my studio, which is a space which is a work in progress. It's a place like a laboratory or a place for research, with no specific intention. There's no specific purpose, but just to enter into a sort of dialogue of testing, of researching, without really trying to look for an answer, but more to observe the actions we're taking, the idea of how one comes into contact with things on an everyday basis, how those things begin to take or occupy a certain sort of energy within one's own self, and then how that then leads to the physicality or the actioning of that relationship of meeting. So I'll quickly start with the video, and then it's a 10-minute video. I'll give you a brief background of the studio as the video plays out, and then we'll stop, and then, possibly with Harada-san, we will, examine certain things, and then I might show you the log project and the evolution of the log project. So we'll start with the video. So as you can see, there's just things in the studio. There's no physical, no motivation about a specific project, research about furniture, research about materials, research or sort of examination of ideas, of thoughts. Uh, so this big sort of stone object that you see, it's a dry stack stone, which you see immediately, this one. And it just bears on its own weight. That means it's looking at the idea of gravity, the idea of compression. This is clay actually taken out because they're taking the metro in Mumbai, in Bombay right now. And it was quite easy for me to harvest this clay because they actually deliver this material to the studio for free. We have to pay just for the short transportation that is there. What is important for me in my research is the idea of the materiality that is embedded in the idea of water, air, and light. That, that is really the basis of what makes us up, both physically and viscerally. That's our construction. So the idea that what one makes is in synergy or resonates with the same energy that we resonate with. All these things that you see that are there in the video are all primarily made in the studio. They're all things that are found within the construct of the city, the construct of other places where one travels. But everything in many ways is made, or in all ways is really made, is constructed and articulated and expressed in the studio itself. The space in the studio is in constant change. Change being the only thing that is constant. So how does one remain adaptive? How does one remain agile? How does one remain open to this idea of change, this constant state of flux? And in that, it's discussing or looking at how we arrange ourselves in a spatial way, in a way that we are able to make contact with all these sort of these things. I want to call them this sort of universe of things that are seemingly there with their own sort of space and energy. This is actually bitumen, tar that we make roads with. And this was testing the idea of gravity, the idea of heat, the idea of time. Again, time is a very important part of the working in the studios, where time is used as a material unto itself. The process of time being the subject of how then it influences us and what is being manipulated. So this little piece is a casting made out of cow dung, like horse dung or cow dung. This is bamboo, pigmented vermilion. So it's not so much about the craftsmanship of the hand, but more about the affection of the heart that manipulates the hand. So I think there's this representation, that it's all about the hand. For me, it's more about the relationship of the heart, the mind, and the hand, and how each one of them plays a role in how we make things or what motivates us to make things. And for me, that is where the craft is. That is what is about the nature of craft. Importantly, this is not an archive for me. This is more a repository. For me, the word repository is something that is present. It's not something of the past, right? It's something that can come from another time, but it's an active space that reverberates, that resonates with a certain kind of energy. So for me, the idea of being in the studio is being in contact with this kind of universe where one thing may lead to something else, might come to something else. And there's no specific lineage or purpose, but the fact that they can all collectively coexist, be it the research towards color, be it the research towards the making of manipulation of clay, the manipulation of metal, the making of brick, the working with bamboo. Again, one of the important things for me in the studio practice is to work outside what I call industrial economy. Right? I'm not saying that I'm for or not for industrial economy or for any other one, but how do I find a space where I have the possibility of freedom of expression, you know, within the industrial economy and outside of that. So I'm not dependent on one specific mode of operation or mode of movement, be it economic, be it political, be it uh, geographical. So somewhere that the boundaries of navigation, the boundaries of movement in some way are dissolved. One is not dependent or one is not held within those boundaries. So the studio practice is more to find a space where these boundaries, so to speak, seeming boundaries can be traversed. For me, the idea of architecture is not about making buildings. For me, the idea of architecture is about making space where seemingly there might be no space. So it's about the idea of opening things up. Paper, stone, plastic, acrylic, concrete, clay, bamboo, mud, you know, there's no prejudice towards working with this material and not working with that material. It's about finding the appropriate equilibrium, time equilibrium, man equilibrium, economic equilibrium. So there's an equilibrium where the given set of conditions that are acting on, you find a way, it's about finding a balance of the appropriateness of why things exist and why they exist for, towards the idea of self-expression. For me, the studio is about the investigation, about the idea of haptic space. What do I mean by haptic? Haptic is one that engages our senses, the sense of touch, the sense of scent, the sense of sound, the sense of taste. That really is about that space. Like, we listen to music has space. We eat, the food we eat, that has space embedded in it. Things we touch, those are everything. So it's the five senses is about how we are able to register or make contact with space. That's the facilities we have. And of course, the sixth one being something that is deeply embedded, that is our intuition. That's just, it's ever present. It's just about tuning in to that idea of intuition, to that idea of what I'm saying, what we call logic or illogic. It exists and it's present, and just tapping into that kind of energy. And so when you bring all of that together, what are the things that emerge from those relationships? We work in bronze, we work in copper, we work with, you know, bramble from the forest. There are branches from the forest in wood. You know, there's no limits. You know, the moment there are limits, the importance is to sort of work towards opening up those limits. Yeah, that's the end of the video. You can come out of the video, Shrija.
Thank you very much. So we were able to see the space in Studio Mumbai. And about 3 years ago, I went to Studio Mumbai with the interview for Vision Glass. And so it was very nostalgic for me to see Studio Mumbai once again.
Yes. Must have been different when you must have visited 2 years ago. The whole space must have been quite different in what was arranged. But yes, it's a place that's always in a constant change.
At the time, there were artisans working in the courtyard and each of the different spaces. And are they working the same way now as they did 3 years ago?
Very much so. We're a much smaller group now. We're about maybe 15 people. There's someone that works with bamboo. So yes, it depends on the work at hand, depends on the people that are available, because it's also a kind of like a migratory flow. They go back to their villages or towns. So there's a sort of cycle with which how things are flowing. But yes, very much, that is very much the practice. More importantly, I've been thinking, you know, in fact, I was just observing it today that this practice is now sort of extended outside the boundaries of the studio, you know, be it Japan, be it, you know, France, be it Italy, be it, you know, Switzerland, that is just, it's not so much about the physicality, but more about a sort of a visceral connection that one makes even through a distance. You know, that distance also now is not of concern. You know, it's one can still connect or meet people in the same way that I'm able to connect and meet people within the studio. So the studio is just the immediacy that allows me to maintain that kind of practice, to help me or to enable me to make a connection much further than the boundaries of the studio. You know, so for me, you know, for the last year and a half, or since, you know, March of last year, I've been working on this medium that we are all collectively on right now. And for me, what was important is how do I still remain in contact, you know, even if I am not able to touch, even if I'm not able to, because I have to create that environment within myself. I have to anticipate the possibilities within myself, which is really what the practice within the studio is. It's about a sense of a mutual exchange in anticipation, you know. And so for me, it's been actually the best medium, because now I can be stationary, I can conserve my energy, and I can still work across, you know, continents now. And for me, that's been the most fulfilling part about it. You know, the fact that, you know, the exhibition that we've put together has been done, you know, in the last 9 months, all through just communication from, you know, through what we're doing right now. You know, and for me, the wonderful part is that it also allows for the engagement, and in some ways to make a contact of, I want to call it trust, but that comes from developing a sort of a language that is shared. It's a common language, which is, outside of the language that we speak. It's a sort of shared language that somehow is there, or that inhabits all of us, independent of what country you're from, what origin you're from, what culture you're from, that there's something really fundamental about a certain language of symbols that exist within us. And the idea is to kind of make contact, mutual aid, mutual affection. And I think for me, that's the important part of how we can then, communicate in a sort of boundless world.
それはビジョイさんが
And so that means, Bijoy, you have the studio, Mumbai, and that is the way that you have established in this studio. And so that means that everyone goes out of the boundary from studio and goes out to the world, and they're able to have a communication throughout the world. Is that what you mean?
I'm saying that imagine it the reverse. So while it goes out, the possibility of out coming in. So it's exchanged both ways. So the idea of the studio as an interior space that is now exterior, and the idea of a studio elsewhere, which is an exterior space that enters the studio as an interior space. So it's a mutual back and forth. It's not just about me particularly. Like, so for example, my association with David, who was very much integral to put this project together, and how it was a sort of mutual exchange that took place, how he was making contact with people in Tajimi, photographs that we shared, conversations that were shared. And somehow, somewhere, you sort of develop a relationship. At the end, anything that has to do with space has to do with relationship. If there is no relationship, there is no space. And for me, the interest lies in the nature of that relationship. And it's not about right or wrong, good or bad, or, I think oftentimes it's our prejudice that inhibits us from making this contact. So my practice in the studio is, how do I develop a practice that somehow navigates through the idea of prejudice? And I mean prejudice in a way that I make something today, and it's about like and dislike, and what if that I think that I made that I'm engaged, or that fascinates me, or that draws me towards it. 3 days later, 3 months later, I might have a slightly different view, so does that then disqualify that relationship? So it's, for me, it's more about observing, through the process of time, of how one can in some way. So the thing that we call, what do we let go? For me, the letting go is of prejudice. And that's what then allows the possibility of, not about like and dislike, or yours and mine, or, I'm better, and so on and so forth, that it's a mutual exchange made from affection towards what is the reason why we're collected together. And for me, that is really what I'm interested in. It's not specific, that it's not about giving a set of instructions, it's not about instructions. Like the whole, the space that you're sitting in right now, that while yes, it was more strategy, or more about practice, is more a tactical device. Like, and I use kendo as a sort of way to best explain this idea of movement, the idea of stillness and movement, because it's about being present, and it's not about something that I did 3 days ago that I carry forward and it remains absolute on day third, because time has already acted on it. So there will be some change that will take place. There will be some kind of movement. The importance is to observe that movement, and to observe how that movement in some way allows, how do I want to say this, allows for a certain flux, allows for a certain change, allows for a certain modulation of a thought or an idea that it's allowed to modulate.
Thank you very much. Then, Bijoy, the next question. Well, you also mentioned about log, which is a recent project. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. So log, it's kind of interesting. I remember it was 2013. It was in the middle of the monsoon here I was of course across the harbor in Alibag, which is, south of Mumbai. It's the mainland. Bombay is the island. And I remember getting a telephone call that there are 4 people who want to come and see you from Japan. And they kind of briefly explained to me why they were. And I said, why are you coming all the way from Japan? There's so many wonderful people and friends that I know. And they insisted they were going to come. And of course, 4 days later, they were at my home. And it was absolutely a wonderful experience. And they spoke to me about log. And I remember very distinctly the idea for them was, we want to make a space that in some way can draw back the younger generation to the smaller towns, to the smaller cities, to the smaller places. And I remember this very distinctly. So they were looking in some way. I had no idea, but I do remember Onomichi because I was exposed to Onomichi through this most wonderful movie. It's a beautiful movie and one of my, favorite in my top 5 movies, Tokyo Stories. So in some way, I had already visited Onomichi, and in some ways, when I think about Tokyo, I mean, my hair stands right now, because also the person who introduced me to Tokyo Stories is someone very close to my heart. He was someone like who introduced me to, to a lot of things from Shakespeare, Freud, etc. And the sort of exposure was vast. But it was wonderful that I had already made contact with the place through through Ozu's film Tokyo Stories. And then we had a conversation, and I think it was 6 months later that I visited Onomichi. And then it was a process of 4 years that they introduced me to Japan. We traveled a lot in that region. They exposed me to the food, to the culture, and I must say, I'm blessed in a way. I'm very extremely fortunate to have had that experience, and as time went by, that's how the project sort of developed. It was this sort of concrete frame building sitting on the hill in Onomichi, in the old part of Onomichi. And really the core of the project was, how do we make a space that in some way is a shared space? Yes, the top floors of log are sort of a private space, which is a place where you can go and stay. And I know it has a kind of like a hotel, but at the same time, it's more public and it's a sort of open space. It's a sort of open, fluid space that allows the people from the neighborhood to be there, for children that go to school out there, for visitors from near and far. When I say near, from people from Japan, from people from the region, but also visitors from other parts of the world that can come in. So in some way, the idea that it the the intention behind that was it's a universal, open, boundless space. And for me, the building in a way is a threshold. It's like a camera obscura where you have where you have the view of Onomichi with the mountain, or the sort of the silhouette of the hills, which you see in the opening sequence of Tokyo Stories. And on the inside, where the courtyard is, the intention is to play Tokyo Stories. So it's a sort of parallax view. There's an inverse view of both of them happening at the same time. Which one is real and which one is mythical is just based on our perception. So really, that was the origin or the reason for me to be in Japan and to have been lucky to be in Japan to make this project. And then while I was there, I remember the first week, we visited Shiga Naoya. He lived there. He had left Tokyo because he had, I think he had a quarrel with his father, and he came to Onomichi and stayed in Onomichi in this beautiful room, which had the window is pretty much the same window or windows of the building of Yamashiroya, which was called Yamashiroya. And so the whole project is sort of based on the relationship of Shiga Naoya with Onomichi and Ozu with Onomichi. And so there's sort of two parts that are brought together, and it's about the sounds, it's about, the bell of the temple, it's about, because you still hear the sounds, you still hear the same sounds that Shiga Naoya heard. You still see the same light, the same silhouette. And likewise in Tokyo Stories. And for me, what's wonderful now is that not very long ago, maybe a month ago, there was a couple that celebrated their wedding at Log. So a young couple. And oftentimes I see the younger generation actually coming to Log, which is for me very satisfying. So for me, it's not so much about the architecture per se, but it's about how that building is more a topography. It's more an extension of the landscape of Onomichi. It's a landscape of the mountains. So it's just another layer or another level of the mountains. That was for me really the intention of how to spatially open up that space.
In log, in renovating log and completing log, and seeing it actually completed, the concepts that you mentioned and what you wish to achieve, do you feel that it has been completed, everything has been achieved, what you intended?
I would say that it's complete in its incompleteness. It's a work in progress. It's not, because there are still many things, there are many layers, and that again is time-based. So I would say that the fundamentals or the infrastructure is in place, but the nurturing of the garden, the nurturing of, the patination of the space itself, sad, I mean, unfortunately, because of what, we've had I don't want to call it a setback, but we've had a sort of a bit of an obstruction in the last year and a half. I think globally, it's not just, not just local to you or local to me. I think it's a global phenomenon that we're confronted with. But for me, what is important was about how the people that work at Log, how they continue to nourish and nurture the space, and it's, let's say, one stone at a time, one plant at a time, one flower at a time, and so for me, it's something that is a work in progress. I don't see it as a sort of, and that's why I said it's complete in its incompleteness. So there's a little house in the front, which is meant to be part of the whole sort of organization of things. That has not happened yet, and hopefully in time that will open up. So the boundaries in some way will get extended. The idea is to slowly begin to extend the boundaries more into the landscape, more into the mountain, and allow more of the mountain to extend itself into Log.
I see. You mentioned nurturing and the space being nurtured by the staff. And I understand that, Bijoy, you yourself provided a lecture to the staff about the maintenance of furniture. This is actually quite unique that in architectural firms do such workshops after the completion of the project. It's very rare in Japan, at least. What was your goal or intention of doing such a workshop for the staff?
I think part of, you asked me the question right at the beginning that, how did Log come about? And one of the things about Log was also that it retains the quality of a studio or a quality of a workshop. That the people that are there, the people that look after it, retain the quality of a work in progress. So, like, for example, we are all of us gathered here right now, we're all a work in progress, right? We're all a work in progress. For me, it's not about the it's about, and like I said, it's about the value of, it's not so much to maintain it, but it's more of what we embody in looking after something, you know, that what we transfer, what we exchange in this idea of looking after something, you know, like looking after an animal, looking after a plant, you know, likewise looking after something that we may sit on, you know, likewise looking after something that we might wear, you know, likewise looking after something that we might eat. So I think for me, the important part is the practice of that. And that's what, it was not a workshop where it was a series of instructions, but more a workshop in how we are connected together in why we are doing what we're doing in this place, or what we're doing in this place. And again, the important part here is about navigating through this idea of longevity. You know, how do we begin to traverse time? And so anything that has self-care, you know, anything that's embedded in self-care has the potential for that idea of longevity. I mean, your country is a very good example of, you know, where I think that is very much embedded in your culture, you know, this idea of self-care in terms of the way that one participates with things. So for me, it was not a workshop of instruction. And again, like I said, my interest is not specific to architecture. I use architecture because that's the medium I've been trained in. You know, it's my training. But for me, it's just one aspect of a sort of a larger whole, you know, because we sit on things, we sleep on things, we eat. There's the what they call the chops. I mean, the bowls, like pottery, for example. Why do you know, revere the idea of pottery in Japan? You know, potters in Japan are revered, right? They have a sort of reverence, you know. So what makes it special? Why that particular way of that pot? So I think for me, the pottery is as much architecture as building is, you know.
今おっしゃった陶芸は
But you
建築
mentioned that pottery is like architecture. That really resonated
思います。
with me.
ログの中の家具
Within log, the furniture, I understand, was all designed by you yourself, Bijoy.
陶芸だけでなく
So it's not just about pottery, but furniture is, I suppose, part of the architecture.
For me, anything that I can participate in, I'm happy to do. So yes, furniture, but to be fair, there were furniture makers in Japan that participated too, and they came up with beautiful things too. So it was more setting up a framework. It was more setting up a sort of loose framework within which we collectively participated. I made a few things, you know, there were a few cabinet makers in Japan that made wonderful things. The Hatano-san from just outside Tokyo, Kyoto, developed the paper, the washi paper, which has actually clay embedded in it. And so the rooms were sort of seen as kind of like cocoons. They were completely wrapped in this paper, and the light that came in. So it was more about, you know, how you're held. So I think this was at multiple levels, a collaboration between the owners of the place, between the people that work there, between the construction agency or the contracting agency, between the cabinet makers, the furniture makers, between the local architect, Muguruma-san, who for me was a very important and very pivotal part of the project, you know, from the plasterer who was from Onomichi. So I think maybe I can just show you slides while I'm talking about log. Yeah, maybe it's not a bad idea just to sort of show you things about log.
はい。
So
Yes,
it was,
please.
yeah, there was a very close friend of mine who's an expert on color. She came from all the way from London, and she was a guest out there, and she spent a week or 7 or 8 days and did a color workshop, and everyone participated in that color. Shrija, you can just keep, just go slowly from one slide to the other. Uh, so yeah, it was a collaboration at a multiple level, but I think the essence of the collaboration, more than the object, more than the building, more than the garden, was that we collected together towards working towards something, something bigger than each of us. And I don't mean big as in a bigness, but in the sort of idea that how do we remain true to the original idea of making this an open space to receive people from near and far. Yeah, so this little text here is best described, on the left, I cannot read, but that intentionally kept, both versions in Japanese and English. The translation in English might not be very precise, but it sort of communicates the essence of, the idea of the sound, the idea of people, the idea of singing songs, the idea of scent, so on and so forth. You can go to the next slide. Just keep clicking through slowly. Yes, please, I'm open to. So yeah, this was the Tokyo Stories. And for me, it's a very powerful film. It's a very beautiful and very powerful film. The idea at log was in some ways to displace the notion of time. And it's quite nice. There's a young lady called Noriko-san who's a wonderful, she looks after, there are two of them, Yoshida-san and Noriko-san, who look after log. And maybe it was 3 weeks ago that I got a beautiful message from her on WhatsApp. And she said, when people come here, she kind of remarked in the message that they're in Japan and not in Japan, which for me was a wonderful message, because when you're there and you're not there, this idea of displacing time, that you can get a sense of being in Japan and yet you're not in Japan. So you're transported to another place, but that's another place in your imagination. So just go back one. This is something very important I want to share with you. So there was this building in the middle. This was an original house, and we pulled it down. And we actually, the flooring, most of the material that we've used, be it in the landscape, in the garden, the tiles, or we did these doma floors, came from this particular house. So I would say 85% of the material that you see that has been done for the floors and the walls came from taking this particular house down. So it was what I would call a cut and fill, like a balance, an equilibrium, taking something away and putting it back in its location. So nothing really ever left the site. Go forward. Srijay, please go forward. But please feel free to ask me questions. I'm just playing this slowly. Srijay, please slowly.
So this is the actual building overall, is that right?
That's correct. This is a model of that. The picture on the left is a model. This is just studies that we were doing. So I'm just sharing with you the kind of process of what went on. Srijay, move forward, please. So this is actually a view taken in the same latitude of Shiga Naoya's house. So this is actually from the terrace of Shiga Naoya's house, looking back at log. This is just a rendering, an earlier rendering. Move forward, please. So yeah, this picture shows Tokyo Stories projected So log also kind of lends itself to like a Shakespearean theater. Do you know what I mean? Like a Shakespearean theater. So the inside courtyard, or suggests that kind. And of course, you also have theaters in Japan, traditional theaters in Japan. So the building typology, in a way, has that kind of construct. And so it's sort of lending itself to all these kinds of different activities, which I'm hoping will take place, in time to come. So I was very interested in having a Japanese Shakespearean theater, perform and make a Shakespearean play here, actually, in the courtyard at some time. This was just a sort of an idea, and I'm sure there must be somewhere in Japan a Shakespearean theater, full Japanese Shakespearean theater that must be present out there. But it'd be wonderful for them to actually do a performance here. Move forward, please, Shuja. Forward. Please move forward, Shuja.
And so this is the original place, I guess. And so you've left the original path?
Yes, can you go back, Shuja? Please, can you go back here? Shrija, can you please go back? Yeah, thank you. Yes, the gateway is the original, the sakura trees. There are, I think, quite a few cherry blossom trees, old cherry blossom trees on the land. So yes, and then we've added this little other sort of flower shop. It's a place, it's a kind of place. So there are elderly people that live on the mountain or the hill. So it's also a place to come and rest on the way to go up. So it's a little courtyard, or like a forecourtyard, before you actually enter into the space. And so the little space on the left, of course, in time, it will eventually become the same color as the gateway or the gate. But that's like a place to sit, a place to rest. Can be a flower shop, can be a place for just people to stop by. Oftentimes the cats there's a lot of cats in the region, so there you find them sleeping in the space. So, but I like the idea that in some way the building is actually open. It opens itself to the street. Move forward, Shrija. Keep going. So you can see the image below that says 5 years ago. It was, I think, taken during the cherry blossom time. And this is the image on the right. And this is something, and what's wonderful for me is that they themselves have nurtured the garden, day by day, one day at a time, few people there. So it's not this idea to complete everything, it's a that's what I meant by it's a work in progress. Also because of working on a very, very tight economic, I don't want to call it a constraint, but a very tight economy to make this work. And sometimes it's not really necessary about how much money you spend, but about how you engage with it. That can, over time, that engagement of economy does not become important anymore. Move forward. So this one has to be opened. Like this structure still is waiting for it to be refurbished, in the sense just to take a few things out. It's not so much to put things in, but more to just take a few things out that have sort of been overlaid through a process of just going through different time periods. Next, please.
This is the main building, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. This is the main building. Keep going, Shuja. So a lot of the spaces, so I would say about 35–40% of the building is an open space. It's just a space. There's no defined function. It's just a place. You can be there and things can happen there. You can sit, there can be an exhibition, you can have a dance there, you can have a music performance there, you can have a lecture there. It's just an open space. It's like part of the mountain. Keep going. So that's the domal flow, and that's come out, the mud that has come out from the building that we took down. So no mud came from anywhere. It was just from reusing what we pulled down. Move forward.
So this soil is the one that you used from the house that you...
That's correct. That's correct. And it's a very particular soil. So we didn't have soil coming from somewhere. It was all there. And we just utilized it to make the floor. Again, the important part here was, I'm saying that it was in some ways to neutralize the concrete. Not that I'm saying that concrete is not a good material. It's very good for infrastructure. But the idea that this material was present, and rather than take it away, that's what made us use this kind of floor. And it sort of came from what we already had with us in our hands. Move forward, please. So yeah, this was the color workshop, and we did all this sort of colors, some of them got used and some of them didn't get used, but it was mixed with shikui, with lime. And there's something about lime that so one of the things that for me is very important is that materials have energy embedded in them. They resonate with a certain kind of energy, and for me, shikui is really the origin of architecture. If you think about it, when so to speak, architecture was formalized, I think at a global level, you found shikui as a building material or as a way, across continents, so for me that there's something about shikui, about lime or shikui, and it's one of the few materials that gets better as it ages. That's its physicality. It improves over time. Move forward, Sridhar. And what's really wonderful for me was these are sketches on the right are from the client. It was beautiful to be able to exchange. Now there is no client the client becomes the space, and we encourage them to sort of have this back and forth communication. So I'm just showing you a few sketches that were made by the client. Move forward. Yeah, just the food that is served, because it's very much local, from the farmers, from the seasons. There's a wonderful lady called Aisan, from Kumamoto. I think she has these incredible books on recipe books.
Hi, Hosokawa,
Hosokawa,
the
yeah.
culinary expert.
Yes, yes. So she does the food. And for me, again, the food is very simple. It's very, and what the times I've eaten the food, you're full, and within about 15 or 20 minutes, you've had a full meal, you've digested, and then you're energized for the entire day. It's that kind of energy that's embedded in the way that the food is made. It's a very potent way in the sense of taste. And so, yeah, that's part of the culture of this place. The local fishermen, they also grow some things within the garden of log itself, so on and so forth. And then I think the menu changes quite often depending on the availability of the produce and the availability of, and of course, tuned to the seasons. Keep going, Sridhar.
So this is the lounge, the free open space?
Yes, this is an open space. This is an open space. For me, it's an extension of the mountain, the topography of the mountain. Like you occupy a place on the mountains which is open, and it's the same thing, that the building becomes part of that mountain. Please move forward. Yeah, so these are, I'm seeing these sketches after a very long time. And it sort of brings a smile to my face at just the conversations that went back and forth.
というのはどこが笑顔を
So what makes you smile looking at this?
No, I'm just
What
remembering,
makes you happy?
you know, the exchange that we had between, you know, there was a wonderful lady called Takeko-san, and she would make these drawings and send them back. And just nothing in specific, just, you know, memory of that exchange that sort of brings a smile to my face. That's, you know, it's a simple exchange. It's not making architecture into this sort of very big thing. You know, it's like we all can connect to it. Move forward, please. Keep going. And again, this idea, I'm showing this particular slide on the, on the right. This idea of the gaze into the distance. So the building is more about this, the format of the opening, you know, the window. And that's really the main thing about the project, is the opening, about allowing this idea of the gaze to sort of extend out deep into the landscape, and likewise deep back into one's own self, or into the building itself. Move, please. Can you be a little quicker, Shrija? Yeah. And that's Tokyo Stories on the right, you know, the silhouette of the mountains in the back. Keep going, please.
漆喰です。漆喰を塗って
So
る
this is shikui, the lime plaster.
And the lime plaster and the paperwork, and, you know, it was wonderful. Like in the beginning, you know, so for me, actually, the project is about many miscommunications. I don't want to call them mistakes, but nothing is right, in the sense that while there is geometry, there's no geometry, because in what I said or what I communicated, how it was understood, how it was interpreted, you know, they're all quite not exactly there. I sort of, in some ways, enjoy the fact that it's precise in its imprecision.
Looking at it, I don't get that impression. It seems that everything is in harmony, that there were no such miscommunication. It seems very comprehensive.
Things can still be in harmony in miscommunication, because it's not about the exactness of what I would have liked, or what, you know, it's about how it was understood, and in the heart it was understood, you know, how it's received, you know, and how then it's given back. And I think the harmony lies in that exchange. You know, like if you take 4 jazz musicians playing jazz, you know, it's not about the precision of how each one plays it, but the harmony between the exchange between the 4 people or the 5 people that creates that kind of music. So it's not about the precision of that, you know, how well they played it, but the harmony in which, and that's what you experience. Please go forward. Forward.
So each member accepted each other, creating that harmony, I think.
I think acceptance comes with, it's not on the first day that it happens, you know, it's like, because we also have to let go our own resistances. You know, we have a resistance built into ourselves. And like what I was saying earlier, it's about, not about prejudice, but about the unfamiliar. You know, we're always resistant to the unfamiliar. And so what I like about when I'm saying the miscommunication is about, it became unfamiliar for all of us in the miscommunication. And I think for me, that's the nicest part about what happened to this project. Please move forward. Yeah, and this is for me the reversal of Tokyo Stories. You know, this was a photograph that came to me via WhatsApp 3 weeks ago. So these are just via WhatsApp. You know, Noriko-san, she keeps me, you know, updated. You know, I'm very happy to see these, because I miss this place. For me, it's a home away from home now. You know, keep going. And it's beautiful to see this, you know, the green growing through the stones. And again, the stones were laid by just people that are working at log. We didn't have any special people to come and lay it. And these flowers are nurtured out there. And you know, I don't know if this video will play, but I think you can forget the video.
はい。そろそろ時間が。
Yes, we are actually running out of time.
Sure. We can just click through that. Please just click
So,
through.
Bijoy-san, you mentioned that this is like a home away from home.
Yes.
Do you see like an origin to this place? So I want to ask, is this kind of space, is this what origin means to you, for you, Bijoy-san? Is this what embodies the origin of how you live your life?
Yeah, for me, the idea of why it is home for me is that the people that are there are my family now. They're like more family to me than B. I think it's just there's a sort of, it's a gentle space, it's a receiving space, and and somewhere my heart is in there too. So wherever your heart is home. For me, my heart is in that place, and while I might be somewhere else, it doesn't mean that I'm not present in my heart. In the same way that you are where you are right now with Tajimi, though I've not been to Tajimi, I can still place my heart in Tajimi. And then it becomes home for me. So we can have many homes, and we can live in many spaces, at the same time. Keep going. Just quickly flip through this. Just keep going now. Just fast. Just click through it. So also the people know that I've made so many beautiful relationships out there. There are so many so many and they're still alive. They're still active. They're young students who are working there, and they were students at the time, and now they've graduated. They were on the construction side. And I get photographs from them, and I get messages from them, and where they are now. And so it's just wonderful that I can have this relationship with another place, which is quite, I guess home is a place where you're intimate, there's an intimacy. Any place of intimacy is going to be home.
So it's not just your hometown is not where you were born.
No, that's just passing through. These are things that we have not built yet, and hopefully maybe in some time, maybe not, but I'm just showing you, this is a little small, like an onsen for 3 to 4 people that has still to get done, but we don't, it may happen, it may not happen, we will see. Just click quite quickly, Sridhar. Can you be fast about it, please, Sridhar? Yeah, this was about using the terrace and so eventually I want Onomichi to become the mountain, like a garden where it's more a garden than a building. Keep going, just keep going. Keep going. Yeah, the reverse of Tokyo stories. And Onomichi in the moon, under the moonlight. I think you can close the presentation.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. And so you described us a lot of detail in log, and I would love to stay there. Next, we would like to talk about MINO soil.
Sure.
May I?
Yes.
Regarding MINO soil, David is going to join us. And David, would you please join us?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Sorry, your name is David.
That's right. No problem. よろしくお願いします。
Nice to meet you all. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
So, okay, where should I start? The MINO SOIL, let me just explain a bit about the project MINO SOIL. It's a project that came about after we worked on a different project in Tajimi called Tajimi Custom Tiles, and it's and the team that has been working behind that project, Kasai-san and his team. And at some point, there was the wish to create a new brand or a new platform to make ceramic objects other than tiles, and to create a project that circles around clay, that has the clay in the center of it. And then I designed this project, MINO SOIL, and which will be a brand for ceramic objects or ceramic products. And I decided to not divide, but to build up this project with 3 stages. And the first stage is actually now this, or each stage is actually introduced with an exhibition, and the first stage is now this exhibition that we made together with Studio Mumbai and Bijoy Archaeology of MINO, that should first really introduce clay as a material. And the reason to do that was that I felt that clay, or we felt very much in Tajimi, that clay is kind of a forgotten or underappreciated material. It's such an essential and primal material that has influenced humankind, the history of humankind, and is also the base for all the economic activity in MINO, and the reason for why people even started to settle there. And yet, when we hold a coffee cup now in our hands, or a ball made of clay, we tend to forget what it is made of. It's usually covered underneath layers of glaze, and we forget that this material is actually millions of years old and has been dug out of the ground. And at first, when making this, we started to talk about making a project about clay, I also was not sure about it because it seemed such a kind of a profane thing, just clay. But then, and here maybe I can share some images. We started to visit these clay quarries in the MINO area, because the clay is still harvested, still quarried in the area. And I'm trying to share a couple of images. Can you see that?
はい、見えました。
Yes, we can see the screen. Thank you.
So,
And we have a logo. The logo is very cute.
thank you. That is actually designed by Sebastian Fehr, a Swiss graphic designer in Tokyo, who I often work with and who is very, very good. This is a picture of a clay quarry in the MINO area. And I didn't even know that these places exist. And when walking down in this quarry, we suddenly understood what this project is going to be about, and why there is a reason to do this project. We felt very much suddenly in a different place and in a different time. And I think I'm not able to express it as well as Bijoy, but very many things that he's just said, like really, I felt very connected to. And I felt these things when going to these quarries. You see these different layers, each layer actually from a different time. And digging deeper, you go kind of to travel back in time, and so you go back millions of years. And when digging this clay, it surfaces for the first time, or touches air and light for the first time in millions of years. And to be there and see that kind of touched us and touched me. And I really felt that there's a purpose of creating this project for objects, but also to really make people appreciate and value this material, which is actually an ending resource, a finite resource more. So these are also impressions from the quarry. The soil.
David, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
So David, what is the background story that you started to join this project?
You mean, so basically it was this other project, this tile project that we have been working on in Tajimi with Kazakh-san and his team, and the wish to create a new platform for objects other than tiles, because we have been making tiles, but we wanted to create other objects, and a project that makes people more aware and more of clay and appreciate it more, and also to kind of reverse the process a bit. Normally we see only the end product, and might like say a cup or a ball, a ceramic ball, and we might appreciate the person who has shaped this ball, but behind that, in this production process, there's many other people involved. And in the beginning of this process, there's the people who dig the clay, and then who process the clay, and who also have a very deep know-how about the material, and are able to modify and mix the material in order to have the best result. So we wanted to a project that would show this, and convey the beauty of the material and this technique through these objects that we're still going to make. Some more impressions from clay factories. I'm just going through this quickly, leading to the exhibition. These are samples. A bigger version of this is also now shown in the exhibitions. In the exhibition, it's small samples of small cubes of different local clay, who have also a variety of beautiful colors, and then when they're fired, change their color also according to different ways of firing them. They can turn out, even if the same clay, can turn out black or beige, or different shades of color. And this is a picture that I took at the Tokyo National Museum of ceramic objects or earthen objects that are many thousand years old, and that I just thought kind of maybe mark starting point for making objects within this project. And yes, and now that we have opened the exhibition, it marks the start, the first chapter of this project, starting with talking about clay. And this will be followed by a second exhibition towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, then talking about the different techniques of manipulating or working with clay and the potential of that. And finally, a third exhibition next year, where we will actually introduce the final objects and products. So,
今回そのチャプター1の土
So
の
this is chapter 1, an exhibition about soil. As you researched about soil and studied them, how did you feel? What kind of things did you find out? Was there anything that was new to you?
well, it was more, of course, there were like some technical things that I learned about clay, but most of all, it was that experience that I described when visiting the quarries, that it is a material that is so much older than we are, and that has been there basically underneath our feet for so long, for millions of years, and then just at some point in time we dig it out and we decide to use it and to turn it into something, and that to realize that was had a strong influence on me, I would say.
Bijoy さん
Bijoy,
いいですか
may I ask you a question?
先ほどのログで漆喰
In log,
を紹介していただいたんです
you introduced about shikui.
よね
Shikui is also soil,
多治見も
and tajimi soil.
まあ土はその土地土地の
Well, of course,
特徴を持って
soil has its own characteristic depending on the region, but what are your thoughts about
共通点
soil? Any commonalities between different types of soil or differences that you feel?
感じることはところ
Any thoughts on soil? Bijoy-san, I think you're muted.
So shikui is very different from clay. So in soil, so yes, everything can be considered under the umbrella of earth or soil, but depending on it's the physical and chemical makeup. I mean, it's the sort of the chemistry of it that defines how we can use how these materials find their way into the way that they're expressed. So shikui is actually lime. So that's more like a stone that has to be baked, and then from that, water is so it's hydrated to give you shikui. While clay is clay, so all the rice fields require clay. The property for clay is it holds water. So if you will observe your lakes or paddy fields that were in Japan required clay, because the moment you give water to clay, it expands, and that's what holds the water. So it's used as a vessel. That's the fundamental physical innate property of clay, that it's there to contain water. Now, so like that, there are different classifications of different kinds of soils or different kinds of that will get classified based on their stratification, based on their location, so on and so forth. Like sand is also part of the earth, but sand doesn't respond like clay, So I would say that each one has a very particular and very precise function. The important part here is that it's the relationship it has with us, or we have with the material. And the best way I can say it is that just like a seed, if I would use this example of a seed sitting inside the ground, it requires the rain for that seed to sort of emerge out of the ground. So it's sitting there, but it requires something to participate in for it to have an expression. It's exactly the same thing with any material, be it clay, be it sand, be it shikui, be it wood, be it any of that. Man is required to participate, but it's not that it's only man that is participating. And I say man in humankind, to be more correct. It requires the material to also send out the communication of how it can be participated or that it can be participated with. So it's a mutual exchange. It's not only one-sided, that it's only because of us that the clay has emerged. The clay has emerged because of the relationship of the interaction of the two. So that's what, in that relationship, there is space. Otherwise, it remains as clay. Otherwise, it remains as soil. Otherwise, it remains as stone. Otherwise, it remains as a tree or wood. It's only in the relationship of how the two begin to respond in the way that each one wants to be manipulated, right? In the expression that's where we begin to find form. That's when form begins to emerge. And for me, I think that's really the sort of basis. Now, with this particular, the archaeology of Mino, or the intention behind the show, was to bring Tajimi to Tokyo directly. How does one bring, there's a expression, saying bring the mountain to Muhammad. There's a sort of expression that the mountain was brought to Muhammad. And I'm using that same expression where Tajimi is brought to Tokyo, in its haptic sense, in the connection of the sound, the touch, the taste, without any specific function, but the fact to create as close as one can, and with the limitations one has, or the space one has, to best express the proximities. How do we bring Tajimi in its intimacy to Tokyo? And really, that's really the function of the show, is that it's more than, for me, it's to show a landscape that is present. It's not the past. This landscape is present. Everything that you see here. So there's a piece of wood which is like a petrified wood. It's present. Now, for example, this wood is normally thrown away because that's not used in the process of the objects that are made or whatever that comes from it. So again, it was to show the place for what it is, without giving that all of them, all these things collected here, have a sort of equanimity in their existence, and they all sort of some way inhabit the ground, inhabit what's below the ground, and inhabit what's above the ground. And it's sort of to connect all these three parts as a sort of environment. So the sole function of the show is to bring Tajimi as close as one can in a haptic way into Tokyo, because this allows for more people to come in physical contact, both through the pictures, it's a sort of through the landscape, through the materials, through the sound, in some way to bring a curiosity for them to actually go and immerse themselves in the place, because it's not that far away. So it's not about making a pot. It's not about making a teacup. It's not about making a plate. It's not, it's not about making a sculptural object. It's just making contact between the landscape and us. That's it. For me, really, that's really the sole purpose. Once you make that contact, the rest can emerge. The rest will emerge. All those things will come. Well, they have anyway happened, when we first made contact. So it's a question of just bringing that contact back again.
すい
exactly.
ません、今お話の途中で、
Sorry for interrupting. And this is for the listeners' information. Now we've going over time. We would like to spend about 30 minutes more and keep continuing.
Sure.
And Bijoy-san and David, please stay with us. Would it be okay for you to both of you to stay with us?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. With pleasure.
Thank you so much. And so, with talking about MINO soil now, we would like to talk about returning to the origin, and we would like to have a talk on that. Would that be okay? David, is there anything that you would like to add on? Please go ahead. Would you like to add something? I think we haven't covered all the slides.
Yes, that's okay. I can just go through and just hope that many people can visit the exhibition, which is continuing until next Sunday. Yes, I think I'm going to close now.
はい、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. And now we would like to talk about returning to the origin. Now, this theme is really broad and it's really, we can think about it in depth. And I think we can think about it in different ways. And there's a lot of meanings behind this return to origin. Now, when we're staying today, we look back and think about what created us as today. Then what do you think is the element that created you today? We would like to ask you, Bijoy, and also David.
Love and affection. That's it.
Yeah,
That's the
it's
only
funny.
thing that we can. That's the only thing that we can receive and pass on. That's the only thing that will give us continuity. Nothing else outside that will allow for continuity. From my point of view.
その愛が、ビジョイさんの場合は、
And so with love is going to be your origin, and that is the
I'm
origin of your activity. I
saying
feel that.
Love and affection. The two, love and affection. AFFECTION, affection. My affection for a plant, my affection for an animal, my affection for my mother, my affection for the food that has been given to me. You know, it's an exchange, it's a relationship, something shared. I would say that that's what has constructed me, or that's what has made me.
それはその今こういったコロナの
Well, today we are under the situation of COVID-19, and I think those two words are very important and has a lot of meaning. But is this something that you always have in mind, or is this because of you went through this 18 months of COVID-19, or is it you have it always in your mind?
COVID-19 is just one small thing in many things to come. This is just the beginning. You know, many more things that we don't even know that we're going to be confronted with. The only thing that will endure in time or through time is love and affection. From my point of view, nothing else can endure. Whether it is COVID, whether it is war, whether it is famine, whatever that is there, that is the only thing. You know, when you think about music, when you think about music that came out of America, that came out from slavery, jazz, blues, the music, literature, poetry, writing, it's even in an extreme situation like that, it was only holding on to that one very fundamental part of us that actually makes us, that allowed for continuity, that allowed for that expression, no matter how difficult that time was. So COVID-19 for me is just a small little dot, nothing else, in a larger scale of many things to come.
Thank you very much. How about you, David?
Well, especially this returning to the origins has got a very personal meaning to me right now, because I just moved back to Switzerland from Japan, where I lived for about 13 years, and came back to my technically my hometown. But as we just heard before from Bijoy, that is not necessarily my origin as I experience it today. I still feel like my roots are, and my heart is still in Japan. I still have to grow new roots in this place where I actually grew up, but it doesn't feel like that anyway. Maybe I feel a bit like sometimes, like maybe there is no way to go back to the origin, which would maybe mean to go back in time, but it's also maybe something that is not necessarily something that we would want. I left a lot of luggage and many boxes of things here when I left Switzerland this 13 years ago, and I came back and I went through that and actually threw out almost everything of it. I really felt that was not necessary anymore, and the only thing was that I was happy to reconnect to people again here. Yeah, I can relate very much to what Bijoy was just saying before. And in terms of COVID, I mean, of course, it was dramatic for many people, but I also didn't experience it as something that affected me negatively. Even though I like to travel, obviously, but yeah, it really made me reconsider many things. I think how, like, the same as many others as well, and has also kind of led me to where we are now, and I'm speaking with you and speaking with Bijoy, and has influenced this project, and things have very naturally fallen into places. And maybe without COVID, it wouldn't have happened this way. So it's difficult for me to see it, for me personally, as something negative. Just yeah, something on the way, like Bijoy said at this point.
Thank you very much. Okay, so then when we think about the word return to the origin, we don't really have to focus on that too much, should we? Then I think we're running out of time. And so we have a lot of questions from the listeners today. And to Bijoy. And so would you please answer the questions? And I would like to go through the questions. Well, you mentioned that COVID-19 is just a little part of your path.
I'm not saying my path. I'm just saying that the path for all of us, we don't even know what we're going to be confronted. I mean, we have climate change like right in front of us. Imagine a world without water. Imagine having wars for water. I mean, something's very fundamental. And I'm not saying that those things will happen, but I would also like to say, I know it's very sensitive, especially given in reference to Japan. You have constructed yourself from even more, far more uh, situations that have inflicted by man on man, and I and so for me, the present condition is an obstacle. Yes, it's a resistance. I would say it's an obstacle that we're confronted with. Uh, but I think we will overcome this. I think we are overcoming this, because humankind is built for resilience. We are resilient as beings. Our beings are resilient, and that is what will endure no matter what is presented to us. And that's part of why we are here, is to endure this. It's part of our journey. Optimistic and hopeful, because if I'm hopeless, then I've lost. I've given to gravity. I'm already done. There's no music, there's no poetry, there's no celebration, there's none of that. I want to invest myself in that.
建築はどうですか？
What about architecture? The architecture
I beg your
in the
pardon?
future, would that be impacted by COVID? I would like to ask you about architecture post-COVID. Do you think architecture will be impacted by COVID in any way? Do you think it will change, or maybe it
think
won't
all-
change? What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
to be very honest with you, I'm not concerned about that. In the sense, I don't mean I don't care about that, but we will find ways to adjust. And likewise, architecture will also find a way to adjust, whatever the circumstances might be, whether it's COVID or something else. I think the fact that we are able to adapt as human beings. We live in the North Pole, we live in the desert, we live in sort of very extreme conditions, and we've found ways to adapt and found ways to live. And likewise, we will find ways to adapt our architecture, adapt our food, adapt our clothing, adapt our language, so on and so forth, to whatever might be there that might seemingly be an obstruction to that. So yes, architecture will possibly adapt itself. I wouldn't say it will change, but it will modulate itself so that it allows us to occupy and inhabit space where we can celebrate. So yes.
はい。あと、もう一つ、
Also, another question that we received is
手仕事について
about working with hands. Studio Mumbai was introduced at the beginning as a studio that emphasizes working with hands and thinking through that work. But how does working with hands and digital technology, meaning computers and using IT, working with computers and IT, can those two coexist? Or how do you think
Yes.
that digital can be integrated into work by hand?
I think, so like I said, it's not about the hand, but what passes through the hand. It's not about the digital, but what passes through the digital. So that's just a medium. The hand is only a medium. The digital is only a medium. It's a medium of transferring, like transferring. We can transfer affection in either of those cases, be it digital or the hand or machine. So it's not about one or the other, but it's how we are able to transmit through that medium. I think for me, that's really what is of concern or what is of my interest. So I think there's a misrepresentation about this notion of the hand. I don't want to get sentimental or nostalgic about that. I'm not sentimental or nostalgic about the notion about the hand. But for me, what's important at the center of all of this is, what do we transmit What do we, what, those are just conduits. The hand is only a conduit, right? Your mother caressing your hand. It's not the hand. The hand is just a conduit to communicate through that caress what she wants to communicate to you, right? It's just as simple as that. So if you think about the show that we have right now, that's done through a digital medium. I've not even been there, but I can use my imagination to conjure up the scent, the touch, the atmosphere. And that's why we have imagination. Like when we read a book, like Shiga Naoyo's book, right? Or the writing, or music, it conjures up, right? It evokes an environment. And so you can participate in that environment. Like music is done digitally today, right? It doesn't mean like Mozart played, a long time ago. We can still listen to Mozart through a digital medium. So, which we are able to transfer or transmit things back and forth. Nothing. So it's not about the priority about the hand or the priority of a machine or a priority for digital tool. Like for me, for example, here where I am, it's far more economical for me to work this way because there's a certain economy. It's direct. Because the people I work with, I mean, my head carpenter doesn't know how to read and write. So what am I going to give him a computer? It's of no use to him. But that doesn't mean he doesn't know how to make a chair, doesn't know how to make a building, he's completely, fully immersed and capable to do all of those things. That doesn't make him less, or that doesn't make the digital less. It's just a matter of how we can communicate with what we have and the economy of what's available in that movement of communication. Nothing else.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much.
あとコロナの話ばかりで。
I apologize to ask you a lot about COVID, but we received another question.
Not at all.
Right now, in Studio Mumbai and in India, well, India has been hit hard by COVID, and we heard on the news that Mumbai is struggling as well. And Bijoy-san, in your studio, how are you continuing your practice? Has there been any obstacles in doing your work? Are you working with masks on, for example?
Yes, we work with masks on, but what is important, which I would like to share with you, is that in March of last year, I was aware of the situation that we were going to be confronted with. So the people working here, we've all been tested, and we all live in the same, like they live next door, so they only walk like 2 minutes away. They have a room, so the same people have been pretty much in the same environment working together. We are regularly tested. Some of us now have our vaccinations, and we've limited the movement of outsiders coming in. When I'm saying outside, like people that are not in the familiar environment, that's been limited. Has that slowed the work down? I would say that we've calibrated ourselves. So it's not about slow or fast. We've just calibrated ourselves to the situation that we are still able to work without, so the limitation is only there for us to come up with ways of working that allow us to continually work. And so I would say maybe the slowed us down a little bit, but for me, no, it's not limited us in the expression of the work that we're doing. So for me, it's more the expression of the work more than the quantity of the work, So that's how I would respond to it. Yes, it's a difficult time for sure. I mean, we're all, our movements are restricted, but we have to invent and make things in this limited resource that we have. And for me, I'm open to that. I'm open to the fact that our resources are limited, so we find ways to work within those resources.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
そろそろ時間に
We are nearing the
質問の方は
end of the session, and so I would like to close the Q&A portion.
最後に
But lastly, Bijoy-san,
Sure.
I would like to ask you about your future project. Do you have anything planned? Any endeavors that you are planning?
Future project is me. The future project is working on myself, is me. In that, everything can happen. What do I mean by that? Is that I'm saying that, yes, yes, there are many projects, so there's books being done, there's buildings being done, there's art being produced, there's objects being made. But somewhere in the midst of all of that, for me, it's like, if I'm the plant, I have to water the plant, and that being the project, of keeping myself nourished, engaged, healthy, in good health. And so for me, that's the project. The rest will fall in place. The rest will happen. I think that's the most important part for me right now. Being in observation of my space internally and externally. I think for me, that's really the project.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Now I would like to hand the microphone back to Sano-san. Thank you.
Mr. Jain, thank you very much for participating and giving us a very precious insight. We were able to understand Studio Mumbai's idea and what your precious core is too, and we've learned a lot from you today. And after COVID-19 is settled, I think you would all come over to Onomichi log, and I think there would be some time that we will enjoy, Mr. Jain, your space. Well, Mr. Jain mentioned that you have to adapt to the situation, and we felt we thought passion for that too. And thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Jain, Harada-san, and David, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.